Welcome to the Mechanical Therapies Lab. What I'll do, I'll give you a quick run round what we've got here, which we'll go in, and then we'll go into detail for everything later. Start off, we have some various materials and tools that we use in here. Other various offcuts and whatever that we will use. More material. This tends to be the holding area for castings. One important area we have the first aid and wash stations. If you get dust or anything in your eyes, sluice it out with the saline. We've got a fully stocked first aid kit with everything you're going to need for cuts and grazes and burns. And here we have the wash station this is the sink we have in here. Everything you'll need, including instructions of how to wash your hands properly. So this is basically the casting station. We have a bandsaw for cutting up material and trimming things. We have the vacuum press with its vacuum pump underneath for actually pressing the material. And we have the oven with the special Mickey Mouse gloves for handling hot materials. The principle being, cut it up, heat it, press it. This is our gluing station. One very important aspect of the gluing station is this massive machine here, which is the extractor. So this, when it's switched on with the central button, this sucks all the fumes from any glue through these pipes and through a filter, so we just get clean air. And this is where you'll be doing all your gluing with these very special glue we use, very special contact glue. And that's the only place we do gluing in here because of the extraction. These machines, this one's a very old one, rather newer one, are shoe stretchers. So if someone has a bunion, we can actually stretch the material of the shoe to make allowances for the shape of their foot. Here we have our 4 grinders, each with different width bands, different grit bands. Very important, this area you see here delineated with red is a mandatory hearing protection. We'll show you the protection later. But while you're in here and using the machines, you must be using earphones because they're very loud. This is the majority of the materials we use. These here, the PPT and Poron, we'll go through it. We'll go through this later in more detail. But these are basically the materials we'll be using to make components. As well as that, the rest of this is cover. You can see a plethora of different covers of thicknesses. These are materials we use for bases for temporary insoles. These are the boxes where we hold the insoles that are waiting for fitting. So the patient in its patient surname. When they're made, they go in there, and then when they're fitted, they'll come in here, pick them up and go and fit them to the patient's shoes. We also have the ear defenders. We have lots of them that get cleaned on a regular basis. As I say, using the machines, you always have to use the ear defenders. However, because it's so noisy in here when the grinders are working, we have these disposable ones which you can use if you wish. When you're here, you'll be working on these workbenches. As you can see, they're spaced for COVID safety. We have room for 6 here. This is the teaching station. So Rodrigo and I sit here. There is obviously some space if we need to expand. Here we have a multimedia screen. As you can see, we can write on it. We can also connect it to a computer to show these videos if necessary. And also it's wired up to 2 of the consulting rooms for teaching purposes. Okay, so I will now show you how to use the bandsaw. This lever here to unlock it, and this knob here to move it up and down. This is so that when you're cutting thinner material, you don't have a lot of blade showing, because then it's more dangerous. So in this case, because I'm going to cut some polypropylene, to put it right down. Now, because this is very noisy, I'm going to be putting my ear defenders on. Make sure it's switched on at the plug. Press the friendly green button. You can see the bandsaw is now spinning round. As well as cutting straight lines, you can quite easily do curves. You just have to be careful doing curves so you're not stressing the band too much, otherwise it might snap. You can see there's a bearing there to facilitate going side to side. And then the red button to stop. Now I'll show you why it's called a bandsaw. If I undo the top here, you can see that the saw is actually one single band that goes round the top. Also, you can see the detritus here. So it goes all around this bottom tensioning wheel and it gets brushed and cleaned off. So the band rotates around that. So it's one single piece of saw blade. If that does break, it shouldn't do, but if it does, then what we have to do is remove it from there. This is the tensioning wheel here. We can slacken this off, which means we can remove the band. It's slack, so the bang should then just come off. You can see it's slack there on the side, so you can just pull the band off, replace it with a new band, and tighten it back up again. Not too tight, otherwise it might snap. You test the tension, so it moves a little bit, but it doesn't move too much. This is the oven we use for heating up the material to go in the casting components. So make sure it's switched on. Top knob is the temperature setting. Bottom knob is it basically switches it on. It's also a timer. So here we set it for 40 minutes and about 180, which is what we use for most of the plastics. When that's up to temperature, the light will go off, so you can put your material in. We have a silicone sheet to stop the material sticking. We also have these handy dandy one size fits all gloves, which allow you to then pick that hot material, which is 180 degrees centigrade, and to move it onto the casting components. When it's all finished and you're not using it anymore, then if you turn it down to 0, hear the ping, and it stops heating. And then we can turn it off. For doing smaller components, what we can use is one of these paint stripper heat guns. Again, it's plugged in and switched on. And we could just use that to warm up some component, just to move it, flex it round. If, for example, we've made a casting that just needs to be slightly thinner or wider, we can heat it up, get to the stage where it's nice and soft. We can just move it a little bit, or if there's a bit of a problem with one part of the foot, we can just make a little bow. Again, that's a very useful tool, but again, be very wary that the fact that is hot, because it is a paint stripper gun. Using the glue cabinet, basic gluing technique. First thing you need to do is make sure the extractor's on. So if the middle button is not lit up, it means the extractor's not on, and you can tell that because it's not noisy. It takes a little while to wind up the big fans inside. You can hear that winding up. You can also feel the airflow through there. Now, for basic gluing purposes, we have these surfaces which we cover, and you can see the glue detritus. I've got some basic component and a base. I'll now just glue that on. These glue pots, just wipe the glue off. We'll go into gluing at much more depth later on, but this is the basic technique. A light covering on both sides of the component, then we leave it for 5 minutes so the glue has a chance to slightly go off, so it gets tacky. At the moment it's still wet. So in 5 minutes time this will be dry to the touch. We can then put the components together, and that's an instant bond. You will not be able to peel them apart without destroying probably both sides of the component. So for the moment we will assume that we've left it for 5 minutes. It's just even at this point, just smooth it down. You can see that it's still wet, but it's still a very reasonable bond already. So in 5 minutes that will be unbreakable. Yep. Talking about the glue, it is a contact glue. So as you've just seen, you have to cover both sides, both components that you're gluing together with a nice thin layer equally. Let it go off, touch them together. You have to be very careful with the alignment of the components, because once it's touched, you will not pull them apart without breaking them both. That's something we'll go into much more depth when we get into actually building the insoles up. But for now, you can see that we have this is called a glue buoy or glue pot with the lid and a brush, and you can see the glue in there. This is the reservoir. It will quite easily fill that. So as this goes down, that will refill the reservoir. If that ever gets ever get empty, we have here the fire safe. Because everything in here is flammable, we have 5 litre tubs of the contact adhesive. So it's just a case of taking that out, pouring some more in, and then replacing that, replacing it back in the fire safe. We also have some thinners. If you find that the brush is hard, then what we can do is we've got a little tub there, we could put some thinners in and soak the brush for a few minutes, and it will then soften. When using either the glue or the thinners, the extraction needs to be on because they have some very strong fumes. The thinners especially very strong fumes. You don't want to leave that in the air because people will start feeling a bit funny. We have these mats, just hard plastic mats. In order to make it easier to clean, we cover it in cellophane. As you can see, it tears occasionally, so that will need to be replaced. But it makes it easier. It gives you a nice surface to work on. One aspect of the gluing station that we have is these are 3 separate stations with a separate sheet. What we found in the past is that students are a bit loose with the brush. They tend to move the brush and hit this top. If that gets covered in glue, you then can't get it off and you can't see through it. So we have these panels which are also covered in the same cellophane underneath as these pads. So if there is glue, as in there, that's only on the cellophane. We can remove that, replace it, and you will be able to see through and see what you're doing. Okay, this is the vacuum press which we use to create the shape of the casted device. Here we have the former, which is done from a cast of the foot. Here we have a component which, for the sake of the demonstration, we'll say has just come out of the oven and has been placed on top with a protective sheet. This rubber template will actually do the forming around. So what we do, we have to clamp that down so that it doesn't lose air. Make sure the outlet is closed, otherwise it'll just suck air through. This is a vacuum pump underneath, it actually sucks the air out. So we switch that on, and you can see that the rubber sheet is being pulled down around the form. Sometimes if it's a particularly thick material, we can push that down and help it, but it's the vacuum is doing all the work. And when that's stable, we lock off the inlet, so because they're both closed, the vacuum will stay in there. Turn the vacuum pump off, and we can leave that as long as it takes for the material to cool down so it's hard enough to then remove. If we assume, we'll hand wave that, we'll assume that it's cool enough to use. We'll let the air back in through the outlet. Once the hissing stops, the pressure is normalised, we can unclamp that. You have to be careful with this because it can really jump at you. And then remove the casted device, and then make sure it's nice and clean for the next one. Here we have the grinders. Now a quick run through of how to use the grinders is needed. Each grinder has 2 sets of buttons. Green obviously means on, red means off. You can see here the left one is for the extraction. I won't switch it on just yet, but you always switch the extraction on first and then you switch the grinder on. If you don't switch the extraction on, then you and the floor will get covered in bits of dust. So it's obvious if someone does that. This here is the emergency stop. When it's running, if you're not safe or something gets caught in there, just hit that and it'll instantly stop the machine. Obviously the band will not stop moving straight away, but it'll stop the motor running. Components of this, all these are basically the same. This one has this added brush here. They all have an abrasive band. We'll open this up and so you can see what's inside. So you can see we have quite a powerful motor, and the band is quite a large band. You get a good grind from all of these. Okay, this knob here, this is the tensioning knob for the band. So if you pull that forwards, you can see the band gets all slack, and you can take the band off, replace it. Occasionally they snap. Most of the time they just get worn and need replacing. So if you do that, take the band off, replace it over both wheels, and then tension it again. So it automatically tensions, you don't have to push it. I'm going to show you the basic grinding. However, I will also show you the rest of this. When you're grinding, if the band takes the component out of your grasp, it will quite often go down there. And the easy thing to do is just lift the flap up, twist it, unlocks this front. And this drawer is where all the detritus that goes through there lives. And you can pick your component out of it, put it back together, close the drawer. Each of these has a large bin at the bottom, and that picks up what goes through the extractor. So that's generally quite full. You don't have to worry about that. That's one of my jobs. At the back of each grinder, you have a bag. This is essentially a filter bag. All the dust that gets extracted through gets sucked towards the back here and goes into this filter bag and then down the bottom. Occasionally the filter will get a bit clogged up because it's just a cloth bag. So we have this knob here. You pull it and it shakes the bag, knocks all the stuff down. One extra feature of this grinder, as opposed to the others, is we have this buffing wheel. It's essentially a load of flat pieces of Scotch-Brite, like a grinding tape, and we use this to polish components. We use it a lot for castings, to clean up the plastic castings, but we also use this if we're resurfacing a pair of insoles, just to roughen up the surface and make it a little bit thinner, because grinding it would be too aggressive and might end up having to remake the whole insole. So that's quite a useful thing. Also, on the other three grinders, we have a wider belt, which is not a good size and grit for grinding. We also have a smaller belt, but they tend to be a more aggressive grind. We don't use them so often. As you can see from these, we actually use these small ones more for sharpening the China graph pencils, because you can't do very many components because it's such a narrow band. But it is useful if you want a really aggressive band. Now I'll show you the working of the grinder. Because this is very noisy, you have to wear ear defenders. So we switch on the fan, switch on the grinder. Ear defenders are mandatory, so you have to wear them. Eye protection is not mandatory, but dust does get flung up, so you can wear them. You can even wear them over glasses. Now I'll show you you can see here, the band is not quite straight. So we can adjust the band while it's running with the large. So turn it clockwise to move, you can see the band moving over. If the band's too far off, you can easily cut yourself on the very nasty cut from the edge, but also means you can use the entire width of the grinder now. I'll also show you the safety feature. Grinder stop. You can see the arrows on there. In order to set it right again, just twist it, the knob comes back out again, and you can stick it on.